Ladies and gentlemen, let me firstly thank the organizers for having invited me. I am working for more than 10 years particularly on energy security, but also since approximately 8 years, increasingly also on raw material supply security, an issue which has become much more prominent on the highest political agendas, particularly since 2-3 years, but Germany started by working out raw material supply security in 2005, and you may know that the European Commission meanwhile has also taken up the issue and has released also raw material strategy and has also become on the EU level a more and more important issue. So I will talk today on specifically on the rare earth supply security issues, which is becoming increasingly important both economically, of course, for companies as well as politically on the governmental level as well as on the EU level. And it has also to do, of course, a lot with China. Let me just begin by pointing out that almost all green technology, including the renewable energy resources, which are, as you may know, very important for Germany, which is phasing out nuclear power. All these green technologies and renewables are heavily dependent on critical raw materials, particularly on the so-called rare earths, and particularly in this regard to the heavy rare earths. In the autumn of 2010, China, which is the world's largest producer and exporter of rare earths, suspended exports to Japan and apparently tried to use its nearly monopoly of global production up to 95% for political ends in a diplomatic conflict. And since that time, that raised the concerns not just on the side of Japan, but as well as on the side of the US, the EU, and many other countries, which brought the rare earth issue into the focus of the raw material supply security of the rest of the world. Putting that in a broader perspective, the international discussion nonetheless are plagued to some extent by misperceptions, misinterpretations, also by failing to distinguish between short and long-term problems, taking into account the diversity characteristics of the resource markets, and overlooking the larger chain supply by focusing almost exclusively on the supply risk of mining and the export of raw materials. Interestingly, many of the discussions today reflect some experiences we had made over the past decades. If you look that as a result of the growing environmental concerns and laws, raw materials previously produced in mines of Western countries during the last 2 decades had to close and were now produced in China, and China benefit from that, but it also reflects our own failures in many respects. Manufacturing capacities in the following years shifted increasingly to China. That's not just true for the rare earth materials. As a worldwide leading producer of raw materials, it helped to climbing up the economic ladder of development to a high-tech power of today. There are rising perceptions of unequal access and conditions to new critical raw materials coming from China and China's raw material policies. And China, on the other hand, is not the only one which has raised tensions in the raw material markets during the last year. So the question I will address in my presentation in the following minutes is, does China's rare earth policy is just one of the fluctuating historical cycles of tight market conditions, or a resurgence of resource nationalism and price spikes in parallel with conflicts of access to resources, or whether we have entered indeed a new era of resource scarcity with a permanent departure from the old price structure and a stable global supply balance, and what that means, of course, for companies and our trade relations with China. You see on the, let me begin with a very basic overview. Oh, that's unfortunately there's a technical failure here, but you may able to see it. The basic material supply chain going from the components to the extraction to the end use of applications and the processing file. And that leads also closing the cycle with recycling and reuse, which has become more and more important for Western companies. So this is a basic material supply chain. And I'm mentioning that because if you normally talk a lot about energy security, supply security, then it's very much, as you may know, related to fossil fuels. Yeah? Is the stable supply of fossil fuels like oil and gas stable in terms of political stability of the producer states, etc. So this has been the focus of energy security during the last 6-7 years, particularly related to gas issues and to the gas conflicts with Russia. And there's a myth, meanwhile, particularly in my own country, here in Germany, where fossil fuels are related to geopolitical risk. And on the other hand, you have renewables and you don't have any kind of geopolitical risk. And I will shatter that kind of extent. We need to look to raw material supply security and realize that also new geopolitical dependencies arise on that side. Dependencies which are even higher in terms of production monopolies some countries, etc. have. And I'm pretty sure that over the next years, the political discussion and also economic discussion will focus much more on the interrelationship and interdependencies between raw material supply security, particularly for renewables, and classical or traditional energy security issues. You see here a basic also overview of a framework of the different dimension of scarcity in raw material supply security. In this respect, it's also not so different from supply security issues on energy resources. You see the physical dimension, you see the economic dimension, and you see also the political dimension, including the issue of trade barriers, which play a certain role in respect to the rare earth material minerals, as we will see in the following slides. You see here an overview of the top importing countries of a number of raw materials. Here, this is not an overview which includes rare earths, but a number of others, which reflects that the Chinese hunger for raw materials as the basic global economic powerhouse has tremendously increased during the last 10 years. There's a huge raw material hunger for producing the end products in China. Part of the supply issues, part of those materials are available in China, but at the same time, China is itself becoming increasingly dependent on the imports of many raw materials around the world. In respect to the rare earth elements, this is a group of 17 chemical similar metallic elements. They are classified into two groups according to their atomic weights and location, differentiated mostly between heavy rare earths and light rare earths, sometimes also medium rare earths had been mentioned. But these are basically the two different dimensions, and in terms of supply security, the much less available heavy rare earths play a very critical role already and will play a role in the coming years. So there are very processing stages before they can be used in an application, beginning with the mining of rare earth ore from the mineral deposits up to the manufacturing the alloys into components such as permanent magnets used in the defense as well as in the commercial applications around the world. The present situation is that the demand of rare earths is estimated of around more than 130,000 metric tons. It went down over the last 1.5 years a little bit because of the overall global economic situation. Rare earths traditionally have not been a particular lucrative commodity. In 2009, just 4 years ago, the world market was only worth of 1.5 billion. But that has tremendously changed over the last year, and you will see some figures later. However, with the worldwide expansion of green technologies, the growing also global defense industry dependence on rare earths, as the civilian sector, as well as China's near monopoly, as well as increased export restrictions, have led to a situation where the strategic value and the prices have rapidly increased over the last year and are expected and will increase over the next year, particularly if the world economy is recovering. In 2010, the situation was that around the demand was 134,000 tons, but met by just 124,000. And so the US congressional report was alarming and pointing out that the world demand of rare earths is increasing or may increase up to 200,000 tons by 2014, dominated by China's production of 160,000 tons. Meanwhile, I think this was a too alarming forecast because of, as I said, the worldwide economic situation. But in principle, the structural problem of a potential worldwide shortage of 40,000 tons, whether it was in 2014 or a few years later, has not in principle disappeared from our analysis. Coming to China's rare earth policies, I think this is one of the most fascinating, interesting issues where you recognize that China's policy are guided by long-term visions and strategic plans. Deng Xiaoping already in 1992 said the Middle East has oil and China has rare earths. At that time, we were even not recognizing how important rare earths will become in the coming years. China's former President Jiang Zemin 7 years later stated, improve the development and application of rare earths and change the resource advantage into economic superiority, is also indicating the strategic thinking behind what kind of raw materials are becoming worldwide of strategic importance. So in the mid-1980s to the early 2000s, China artificially deflated the cost of rare earth exploration and production, and confronted with rare earth prices going down, many Western banks did not see enough profitability at all and further supporting mining outside of China. So many mining companies in Australia, the US, the Mountain Pass mine, including the world's largest rare earth mine at that time, were closing because of a perceived lack of profitability as a result of short-term thinking, quite contrary to Chinese policies. China currently is exporting rare earths, oxides and metal, but fears China will only export finished rare earth material products with a higher value in the coming years. It currently, as I said, controls more than 95% of the worldwide production, so it has only 35% of the global reserves and 57% around of the global resources. Since 2006, it imposed an import tax of 15% on light rare earths and 25% of heavy rare earths. And that was the beginning of the import restriction policies, which has become very much on the focus of the Western governments and the Western industry during the last years, and I will come back to that point in a minute. Very important, in 2009, an industry plan had been published, which was indicating that China's automobile industry may not be competitive in terms of traditional motor technologies, not able to compete with Germany, Japan and others for the years to come. And so China's government and industry decided, alongside of environmental issues, for promoting electromobile car development plan, and that was alongside of the rare earth industry development plan. And in this respect, it became quite clear that China wanted to use its monopoly on rare earths, restricting exports, and so being competitive and becoming the leader of electromobile car development in the years ahead, whereas Western Germany might be having the engineer skills of building those electromobile cars. It would totally dependent on the supply of raw materials. That raised, of course, the concerns in the Western countries, particularly in Germany as well as in Japan. The destinations of China's rare earth exports in 2009, you can see the largest share went to China, then to the United States, and then to some other countries. In terms of its strengths, it's very often overlooked that China has two major national laboratories devoted entirely to the rare earth minerals and applications. It has more than 100,000 registered researchers, I think probably more than almost the rest of the world. Unfortunately, that is also not working, that kind of overview. I'm sorry, but you will have the presentation afterwards being available on the website. So there are technical problems, obviously. You see here a comparison of the global demand for selected materials. I should add, going back, although you can't here recognize that, there is a three-level import tax policies in China existing, which is very much contradicting the WTO obligations of China. So Chinese companies operating in China have to pay the lowest tax for rare earth minerals. Then you have foreign companies operating in China paying a higher tax than the Chinese companies operating in China. And then you have foreign companies operating outside of China, which paying the highest tax for rare earth. So this is one of the major issues why rare earth and China's tax policies and export restrictions have become a major conflict for the trade relations between China and the US, as well as between China and the EU and Japan. You see here a comparison of the global demand of selected materials of the years 1980 to 2008, and you see here that the rare earth with the orange or little light brown straight is also continuously going up, although some others like indium have even increased more. In returns to the global shifts of production, you can see here that the United States until around 1990 or the mid-1980s were the biggest producer, has the biggest production thanks to its Mountain Pass mine in California, which then, as I said, closed. And then China jumped in and became not just the largest producer, but taking up almost a near monopoly of the worldwide production of rare earth. You see that here's how rare earth the production has been going up from the 1970s to 2010, even faster than all the others. And the prices fluctuated, on the other hand, a little bit more, but at the end, already before 2010, it was beginning to increase very rapidly. You see here a combination of the historic supply, demand, and pricing of rare earth oxides in terms of China's overall supply and production vis-à-vis the rest of the world, as well as along the prices, which are showing that the price is going up after some time alongside of this near monopoly on the Chinese side. You see here some other overviews in terms of rare earth oxide prices up to the year 2011. You see the different prices between the years 2007, 8, 10 and the fourth quarter of 2011. So these prices raised much more, also from a very low level in contrast to other raw materials. You see here another one of the prices of selected particularly heavy rare earths from January 2004 and beginning of September 2011. As I said, heavy rare earths are much less available. The production monopoly is almost 100% in China, and the heavy rare earths are particularly needed for magnets, also electromobility, and a lot of other green technologies. Without, you wouldn't have the same efficiency like for windmills, meanwhile, if you wouldn't include those heavy rare earths. The next one shows import dependence and import origins. Almost 6 years ago, in respect to various raw materials, not just related here to rare earths, which is also showing that, as I said, that China's raw material hunger has tremendously increased. It's becoming dependent on imports more and more from many raw materials, which it doesn't have available in its own country, in contrast to rare earths. So import supply security, raw material supply security is, of course, for China in respect to other critical raw materials as important as it is for the EU as well as for the United States. You see here an overview of the global reserves and resources of minerals based on the information available in 2009. You see here that at the surface, at the first glance, rare earth minerals are quite available, much more than many others. So at the first glance it doesn't look so alarming, but as I said, the situation is clearly a little bit different if you look specifically to the heavy rare earths, as we will see later. So after the diplomatic conflict, by establishing this export ban of rare earths to Japan in the midst of a diplomatic conflict, the United States as well as the EU began to looking very critically on those raw materials, making a lot of analysis and also looking ahead what kind of critical raw materials are becoming even more critical in the years ahead in regard to emerging technologies which become ever more important in the years ahead. And you see here that minerals defined as critical to the EU, here an analysis of the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, which came to similar conclusions as the EU itself did, as well as some other countries. And you get an overview how which kind of raw materials becoming critical in the years ahead, particularly if it's related, also related to germanium, as well as some others. You see on the following slide an overlook of selected rare earth companies and their market capitalization of the year 2011. Here again, Molycorp in the United States has the highest market capitalization, leading before Linus Corporation in Australia and some others. But that picture, of course, will change in the years ahead, where also more and more Chinese companies will climbing up the ladder and will take the overall world leading position, I guess. You see then an example of the market characteristics of the rare earth magnet supply chain, ranging from the market concentration to capital requirements, technical requirements, regulatory requirements, and property entry barriers, etc. This is an official assessment of the US Department of Energy released in 2011 by taking the rare earth issues into the focus of the raw material supply security strategy of the United States, which is quite similar in respect to the conclusions what on the side of the EU came out. And that has, of course, a lot to do looking ahead with the worldwide economic developments and the demand side, specifically focusing on countries such as India, China, the ASEAN-6, Nigeria, and others, which will add 1.3 billion urban residents by the year 2050, which will be the major driving factor for the raw material supply demand. And it can be expected that those raw materials will become ever more important in terms of the demand and supply side. Another factor, as I said, is of course related to the car industry, specifically also related to electromobility. Although we have at the moment here in Europe, including my own country, a kind of crisis. As you may know, the official government goal of having 1 million electromobile cars in Germany by the year 2020 doesn't seem very realistic meanwhile. But beyond those goals, I think the passenger vehicles for traditional motors, and particularly for the electromobile industry in the years and the next decades ahead, will become ever more important. And here again, that has particularly to do with China again. You see then an overview of the raw materials that are driving emerging technologies, which had been identified for the various raw materials, including some of the rare earths, which is indicating the overall increasing importance for green technology and the emerging technologies, which you can also see on the following overview again from the US Department of Energy, quite similar again with the EU ones in respect to photovoltaic films, wind turbines, vehicles, lighting, where rare earth elements are needed more than ever. Here another one on additional technologies and materials needs to be watched over the next decade, ranging from indium in the nuclear power industry, where outside of Germany, I think the nuclear power sector, like in Asia, will increase. And fuel cells play a very, very important role in the coming decades, as you may know, as well as magnetic refrigeration, catalytic converters, and others. Against that background, a differentiation had been made, both again in the US as well as in the analysis in respect to the short-term as well as medium-term criticality, here put in a matrix where the importance to clean energy resources, those materials become or will become even more important, more critical, with a higher supply risk in the years ahead, as well as in the medium term, particularly in regard to neodymium and dysprosium as rare earth elements, as you can see here. The next one gives an overview again on the global demand of the emerging technologies, analyzed raw materials in 2006 and 2030 related to today's world production of specific raw materials. That has been, as an overview, been made by the Federal German Institute on raw materials, as well as an analysis of the European Commission. I would not, of course, read here all the details, but it gives you another overview about the indicators, how the situation is changing between the years 2006 and the medium-term perspective 2030. Again, this matrix is giving another overview of those critical raw materials, particularly related to rare earths, which have been identified in those analyses as being the most critical ones in respect to future supply risk. Overall, the European Commission has analyzed 41 materials which had been identified as most important ones before, and against that background 14 materials had been then identified as the most critical ones, Again, one can differentiate between short-term, medium-term analysis, and also in respect differentiated between critical, near critical, and not so much critical. Coming back to China, as I said, the new export restrictions have become a major controversial issues during the last years. I also said it began in 2006, but then 2009, with this rare earth industrial plan, that raised the alarm clocks on our side, because in this major governmental report it has been stated that all exports of rare earths will be cut, will be banned by the year 2015. Yeah? Because of environmental and other issues. Environmental issues play a role. I would not neglect or contradict that, but of course there are other industrial interests behind those Chinese policies. Then in July 2010, the Commerce Ministry decided to cut the export quotas within a short time, namely the second half of that year, by more than 70%. Here again, that led to the intervention of the WTO, as well as of all the countries being dependent on the supplies from China in regard to the rare earths. We got the impression that more and more Western high-tech companies are forced to relocate their production sites to China, because the precondition was that you wouldn't get any supplies if you relocate those companies to China itself. 2011, new export quota had been introduced, but at the same time with promises in the light of those international criticism to keep exports until the end of the year on the level of 2010. But essentially the situation was different, because with the amendment of the so-called ferroalloys to the export quota, the released quota was essentially an effective decrease by another around 70% compared to 2010. And here again, a lot of international criticism led then to a situation where the Chinese government had to react to that kind of criticism. You see on the right side, the export quotas have been adapted to that kind of criticism and were not so high as being previously announced. But basically, the overall challenge and problem in this respect of restricting those supplies to the outside world, and what that means for the world free trade, for the WTO in terms of the credibility of an institution where China belongs, as well as what that means for the Western industry. These kind of challenges have not been disappeared. The export ban ended after 38 days. Interesting, it began with no official acknowledgement and without any explanation of the government, and even afterwards you had no official comments. But the export ban at that time was not just related to Chinese companies exporting those rare earths to China, but it also concerned all foreign companies operating in China. They had also to take into account that kind of unofficial export ban. Since then, increasing diversification, recycling, substitution efforts are being made on the side of Japan particularly, but also the US and the EU. The issue of stockpiling technology, so-called technology minerals, as a short-term supply solution for disruption or temporary price spikes has also been addressed, although neither the US nor Europe nor the EU at the moment are willing to do that, which might be a very costly issue. But this is an issue which will definitely not disappear from those discussions in the years ahead, alongside of the worldwide increase on the demand of rare earths. Almost all, as I said, all worldwide heavy rare earths are currently produced in China, so almost 100%. It's even higher than the overall figure for the rare earth production. And they are, as I also said, only available in small volumes. Even the world's biggest deposit in China, in the Bayang Obo, represent just 4% and only 1.4% in all new worldwide deposits expected to begin production in the near future. So this situation will not change overnight, as opening mines, particularly in Western countries, often takes time of 10, 15 years. Maybe in Africa it's not taking so long, and in other countries, but at least the situation will not change for the next 5 to 7 years. I also mentioned first WTO ruling, which was not addressing the rare earth issues, but other raw materials being mentioned here on the slide. And it ended with the victory of the US, the EU and Mexico in a very closely watched trade dispute. China did not accept that ruling. There is a possibility of an appealing panel which then ruled in January 2012 and confirming the July decision that China must dismantle its system of export taxes and quotas of 9 widely used industrial materials. Up to the situation now, the situation had not changed at all. Yeah? So we have this ruling, but nothing changed afterwards. And that raised, meanwhile, the overall credibility of the WTO and the responsibilities China has. And because of that kind of frustration, the long discussed issue of import taxes for and restriction policies for rare earth had become another issue for the US, EU, Japan and Canada, which filed an official complaint against China to the WTO. And it also includes 2 other minerals, as you can see here. And it was expected that in the first half of this year, this ruling can be expected. I haven't heard anything so far. But most experts expect that the ruling cannot be different from the previous one. And then if that would take place, then the situation is what will happening afterwards if China is not adapting to the WTO ruling. Yeah? So, and that is then an issue which is no longer just related to the rare earth issue. It overall concerns the future credibility of the WTO. So a lot of stakes are here included. As you can see here, alongside of other trade disputes the US, Europe, Japan have with China, as you will know, with the solar panel issue heavily discussed during the last year. You see here another overview of the rare earth supply chain and also possibilities of diversification where Russia plays a certain role, India as well as others, but I also said the situation will not change overnight as the opening of new rare earth mines, which are also difficult to extract in terms of environmental in an environmental sound way. That issue will take some years, but at least diversification efforts have been tremendously increased since the year 2010. Finally, you see here an overview, which I also would not go through, you can read it afterwards, giving an overview of the policy goals, the business policy, research and development policies, and materials of interest for selected countries and regions, which is, I think, highlighting the pressures for all sides, as well as the tension it may create for future supply chain problems for all sides. Finally, an overview of the current projected rare earth project outside of China. Again, it will take years before they will materialize. It brings me to the overall summary and giving you some perspectives. The global market value of rare earths is projected to increase to as much as 10 billion by the year 2014 and even 20 billion by the year 2020. Again, just a few years ago, it was just 1.5 billion. So the lack of proven data and transparency in the raw material sector, particularly in the small resource markets like technology minerals, like rare earths, is nowhere more than important than about China's rare earth policies and industries. The international efforts have been strengthened to diversify, and needs to be strengthened to diversify the imports by creating more suppliers, more competition in the market, and to increase investments for opening new mines around the world. We need ever more than some countries like Germany do already, promoting so-called urban mining, which means recycling of critical raw materials, particularly including rare earths, from used electronic devices. Politically, the Chinese export can and Beijing's use of its near technology minerals for political ends have definitely sent a more troubling message to the world that outside of China, the new rising Asian economy, as well as military power, does not seem prepared to assume the regional and global responsibilities that grow with that status. That's a political message from our side, where we need to go in much more also political discussion of raw material supply security issues like rare earths with the Chinese government and the industry, even more than in the past. Let me finish by quoting a German analysis of September 2011 on rare earth policy and the global markets and the problems I indicated. This analysis concluded by arguing that despite increasing global efforts for recycling rare earths, in the future only those, and I add Western companies, will benefit from big market chances in many fields of green technologies which have secured their own raw material supply with rare earths. Otherwise, those companies will disappear from the market, and very often that's the practice at the moment. The only possibility for those companies is to relocate their production facilities to China again. So the recommendation follows in principle a three well-known pillar strategy, which is not really new, also related to energy security, supply security issues, namely firstly, creating a diversified global supply chains by multiple sources of material and imports, developing substitutes by expanding research and development of those critical materials, and thirdly, expanding recycling, reuse, and more efficient use to lower the overall demand as well as the import of rare earths from foreign producers. And I would add the fourth one, I think in terms being dependent for the time being heavily on supplies from China. If your company has a need for rare earth supply and will need to get it from China, there's a need for a strategic Chinese partner company, otherwise you won't survive in that kind of market. Thank you very much.